You see it everywhere. Pundits on Monday Night Football reviewing it, analyzing it. Your favorite pundits come the weekend are always analyzing using it. Your favorite football analytics account on Twitter is always constantly putting out these metrics. Expected goals, or XG, has completely taken over football, promising a deeper, more objective truth than the actual and simple scoreline. This is the Football News Podcast. Welcome on board as today we try and dissect what's expected goals and how it might actually be lying to you. But what if the truth that we are actually seeking is actually a bit of a lie? What if this clean thing that we are actually seeking out, the elegant number, is actually hiding the beauty and the elegance that what if this clean, elegant number that we are pursuing on a constant basis is actually hiding the beauty, the chaos, and the unpredictable reality of the sport that we actually love? The football world has become obsessed with XG, but I'm going to show you how the fundamental flaws of this new stat are actually. The football world is obsessed with XG, and I'm going to show you the fundamental flaws that actually are rarely discussed and explain why the eye test that you've been told to ignore might be more reliable than what you think. Into the first part, we'll be talking about the seductive promise that's being brought about by XG. The rise of XG came from a very clear and understandable frustration. We've all been there. Your team dominates a match, you have, let's say, 25 shots on target against your opponent's 2, and somehow you end up losing 1-0. The traditional stats, shots, possession, pass completion, average miles covered during the game, they just don't capture the injustice. They tell us about quantity and not quality. Now this is where the new stat swoops in. It's a metric that's designed to measure the quality of any given goal scoring chance. So let's say your team is actually attacking, and you, on the offensive, you have an opportunity to score. This will be put down as an XG because you're actually expected to score this chance if it's open, kind of. So how XG actually puts the expected goals, it's going to analyze hundreds of thousands of historical data models designed to assign sort of a probability to every new shot that's about to come, and think of it as a weather forecast for a shot. The stat metrics and how it's designed is there to actually predict if your team is going to score or if not. So it factors in things like distance, angle, the type of pass to be created. It factors in things like the pass to be created, the distance, and the angle that a player needs to take to actually score. A tap in front of goal is also part of the XG, and it normally lies within a 0.8, that's 80% of a chance to be scored, which makes the XG a big factor into how the strikers are expected to put goals in the back of the net. But if a tap-in has a 0.8% XG, then a wild volley maybe, or a wild shot from 30 yards has a 0.05 XG, which means the probability of it going in is actually not so high. So which again begs the question, is XG only for goals to be scored inside the box or close to the 12-yard point? So lots of questions come up. You have to ask yourself, do we need a different XG for the 30-yard screamers that we see being made, or the the half field goals that we see? These are questions that we have to answer, because if XG only factors in goals that are actually in the box, then we have an issue. In theory, XG is brilliant because it gives us a clearer picture of which teams are consistently creating great chances and which teams are just getting lucky. Over a long season, XG can be a powerful indicator of a team's underlying performance. Take for example Brighton and Hove Albion. They've been consistent over the last 3 seasons. They've put in massive shifts across the entirety of the seasons, and they've been actually scoring, and sometimes they've been outscoring their expected goals for the season. So now I'll try to do a deep dive into the first flaw, and it's a myth of the average players. Here is the first and most arguably biggest lie that XG will ever tell you. It assumes that a single player is perfectly average. It's like a driving simulator, and when there's difficult maneuvers for the driver to make and makes them, let's say in this instance, if Hamilton is on a driving simulator and Lewis Hamilton actually makes a wrong turn when it's a difficult maneuver, he'll be considered mid if it's in the aspect of the XG. But what it doesn't tell you is it doesn't matter who's behind the wheel, they might actually make the mistakes, which makes you question XG again. Does the player not need to make any mistakes? Should the game be flawless? Which makes it look more robotic if it's actually flawless. What this XG model doesn't tell you is it doesn't matter who is on a one-on-one situation, a player versus the goalkeeper. It doesn't know if it's a world-class finisher versus a world-class goalkeeper. It doesn't know if it's someone like Erling Haaland versus someone like Alisson Becker, who can pull a save out of nowhere, and Erling Haaland can score out of nowhere. These are factors that the XG doesn't actually take into consideration and makes the player who doesn't score look average. Here is an example. 2 players, Heung-min, who's actually going to LAFC from Tottenham, has constantly outscored his XG, and he's made a mockery of the XG that's actually been put for him to score. You see his best season might be the 23-24 Premier League season. He constantly scored from unlikely positions, making the XG factor go into the bins because he was world class in situations that we didn't expect him to score from. On the other side, you ask yourself, was Son fully lucky throughout the season, or is the model simply failing to capture his exceptional two-footed finishing ability? On the flip side, you have someone like Darwin Núñez, who constantly underperforms his XG, and at Liverpool he's become the poster boy for failing to score and outperform his XG. In the same season, like Heung-min, the 23-24 season, he actually scored 11 goals, but from an XG of over 16. So a massive underperformance, a massive failure of hitting your goal targets for the season. And what the XG model doesn't tell you is Liverpool actually scored more goals, irrelevant to Darwin Núñez missing the goal target that he had from the XG. So the second flaw that I have with XG is the fact that it doesn't see the full picture. I'll put this analogy to someone who actually goes to the movie theater to just watch the last few minutes of the movie and get the feeling of if it was a blockbuster movie or if it was a mid-tier performance from the movie. But this person didn't actually have to watch the plot build up to the blockbuster scene or build up to the mid ending. That's the factor of XG. It only sees shots. It doesn't see the patterns of play that have led to the build up to the goal. Think about a defender making a last ditch goal saving block. A shot might have a high XG, let's say the 0.8, because it's from a great position. But on the other hand, you have a defender like Thiago Silva or Virgil van Dijk who might make the last inch goal clearance from the goal line. So XG doesn't see the full picture. Even worse, XG completely ignores the incredible, dangerous situations that don't end up as shots. Picture this: you have a winger, he absolutely obliterates his defender and marker and fires in a perfect ball into the 6-yard box, and the striker is waiting for the tap in. But in the last second, you have a defender swoop in. Let's say Ruben Diaz swoops in and just makes a clearance of the ball. Everyone knows it and everyone will decry it as a missed opportunity, but actually XG will see it as a missed golden opportunity. But because no shot was ever taken, the XG for that entire game-changing moment is actually 0. So which makes you wonder, should the goal actually go in for the XG to matter, or are certain aspects of the game to be ignored for XG to be seen as a better start to view football than the eye test? My third flaw with the XG is the fact that they are not equal. Here, let's have it. We have different companies in this game. We have Opta stats, we have StatsBomb, we have Understat, official XG. These models are actually created differently. It's like going to YouTube, search a recipe that you want to make a cheesecake or maybe chocolate cake. You'll find different ways of making it. You will find different toppings to each cake, which makes you wonder, should XG be harmonized across all these platforms, and should it be fine-tuned to actually see the bigger picture? That's XG, and one source of XG might actually say 0.4 chance, and the other on the other side might say 0.6. On the other app that you go to check into might say 0.8. It might not say much, but it actually adds up over a season. If you tally these points, 0.6, 0.8, 0.4, the difference between the models for a team are actually high, as 4 goals were missed. I think we have Chelsea being counted as having missed 8 clear goals across the last season, which makes you wonder, does the XG actually factor in the essence of having a striker in the team? Chelsea were missing a striker for about 6 months, 3 to 4 months, and they had to use a makeshift, a false 9, someone who isn't as good as a finisher as a striker. So I will say, when your favorite pundit is actually bringing out the fact that this team won on XG of 2.1 to 1.4, they are actually marketing the company that they are using to view these metrics. It's objectively bias. It's a objectivity bias in this case, because you're using this app. A different pundit in a different show might say the game was lost 1.8 to 1.2. They are actually representing the company that they are working for, but the number you see is shaped by the hidden choices of the company that created it. They all know how they have magically set it up to base these shots, passes, the angle, and eventually that's the tally that we see at the end of the game, the 2.1 to the 1.4. The fourth flaw might actually be the last flaw I have with this XG thing. It's the single game sample size trap. Any data scientist will tell you that for XG to be valued in its best form, it actually needs a large data sample, and that's a full season to actually determine how an XG was used. But a single 90-minute game doesn't give you the clear picture, because football is actually pure chaos, and a single match doesn't bring that into light. Take for instance 2016-17 season, Chelsea versus Manchester City. Chelsea were trailing 1-0 down by halftime, and at the end of the game it was 3-1 to Chelsea. That's pure chaos that's not been taken into account, and that's not the whole picture that was seen. City were dominating the game until Chelsea made some few changes, and then you ask yourself, does XG factor in that substitutions make changes to the game, or do they only see these things as shots and the angles that the players take to make the shots? So let's take into consideration the deflections, the ricochets, the fact that a keeper might be having their worst day in office. Take for example someone like Kepa Arrizabalaga. People like Nick Pope have cost Newcastle some games. People like Aaron Ramsdale, people like David Raya, they've actually had bad days in the office. Also Alisson Becker and Ederson, they've had bad days in the office. But then, does XG factor in that these people are humans? They are not robots that they have to move in a synchronized way, in a way that makes everything look perfect, because deflections do happen and they lead to goals. And on the other hand, a keeper might handle the ball but actually spill it to goal. We've seen this in the Club World Cup. Tunis, Tunis, the goalkeeper handled the ball but it actually ended up in the back of the net. So these are factors that XG doesn't take into account, and half chances actually turn into goals. The half volleys that we see players make, it's an injustice not taking into account that half volleys can actually lead to goals. But let's take into consideration the 3-2 victory of Manchester United versus Brighton. Brighton dominated the game and they actually drew, but then they lost after a penalty that was awarded after the game. It's one of the weirdest moments in football history, that a game players were headed to the tunnel and then they were recalled back for the game to have a penalty, and the XG doesn't tell you the full story. Brighton actually dominated with a 2.9 to 1.5 XG, but then they lost to a penalty that was awarded after the 90-minute whistle. So XG has its own flaws, and taking a single game into consideration is the worst thing that XG can do to actually try and make a case for a team over only one game. It actually needs to go for a whole season, that we have a clear picture of how the team performed across the whole season on its XG metrics. So what do you think? Have you ever watched a game that the XG felt like it's from a different planet. And was it different to what you actually saw on the screen or live on the football pitch? Drop a comment below and tell me what you think the biggest flaw of XG might be that I actually missed. Let's get chatting on the comment section. And if you enjoy these deeper dives into football's biggest debates, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. So what should we do with XG? Should we just throw it in the bin? No, of course not. When it's used in the right way to spotlight the long-term performance trends, it's an incredibly insightful tool for clubs and analysts. It will help us understand which teams are consistently doing the right things to create the right quality chances. The problem is the stat. The problem isn't the stat itself, it's how it's being used by our pundits on the mainstream media, on the football Twitter accounts, and when it's treated as the final, the problem isn't the stat itself, it's how it's being absorbed into the mainstream media. It's how our pundits are using it on a daily basis to analyze how a team should have performed. It's how the football Twitter accounts are actually misleading people into thinking that the expected goals is the best performance metrics to measure how a team should perform. But it creates a distorted view of quality. It ignores the unique skills of the individual. It's blind to game-changing moments that aren't shots. It changes depending on who you ask and which company is putting out these metrics. As fans, as pundits, as the analysts, we've actually elevated XG from being a useful tool to an infallible judge, and the process we risk sanitizing the very things that make football the greatest sport on earth. Its randomness, its moments of individual genius, and its glorious heart-stopping ability. That is something that football shouldn't be rid of. The truth of the game is we won't find the best analysis and the best moments on spreadsheets. What we actually need is to reset our minds, because the best tool that we have always had is our own eyes. The final score is what goes into the history books, and no amount of expected goals can ever change that. Thank you so much. Catch you in the next one.